Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Chevy Chase at Home Speakers Forum. My name is John Idstey. I am a member of the Chevy Chase at Home Board of Directors. We're excited to see such a strong turnout today and anxious to introduce to you Steve Livengood, who will share with us his deep knowledge of our nation's Capitol building. But first, a couple of words about this organization. As many of you already know, Chevy Chase at Home engages our community in social and educational programming, both in person and virtually, as we're doing today. We also provide volunteer services to older adults who need assistance, including rides, errands, tech support, household assistance, and even just friendly visits. If you haven't already, we urge you to consider joining Chevy Chase at Home or your local village and become a member or volunteer. Now, on to our program. Our guest today, Steve Livengood, is a renowned and award-winning historian. He is the public historian and chief guide of the U.S. Capitol Historical Society, a private, not-for-profit organization chartered by the U.S. Congress to develop enhanced experiences related to the history of the Capitol building and the institutions that have been housed there. His specialty is interpreting the building with historical background on the meaning of activities and artworks as icons of representative democracy, seeing familiar things from a deeper perspective. Mr. Livengood has worked in various capacities in DC political and policy circles. He began giving tours of the Capitol for his member of Congress from Kansas way back in 1965. He lives on the Southwest waterfront in Washington, and today he will give us a virtual tour of the U.S. Capitol. Steve will answer questions at a couple of points in his presentation, so type your question in the chat box and I will relay it to him. Steve, we are so pleased and honored to have you with us today. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, John. Obviously, this is the building we're going to be talking about. It is my pleasure to talk about it. I think I have one of the most fun jobs in Washington because they get to talk about the most important building in the world. The U.S. Capitol Historical Society is where I work, and I've put my email up here in case you want to ask questions later, because it's our job to help inform you about the Capitol building and to help people understand. And if you have questions, then other people will have that same question, and we need to be prepared about it. I'm going to cover three topics, basically. First of all is how the Capitol was built and how is that's reflected in what you see. And then I'll stop for questions. And then we'll move on to a walkthrough of some of the historic rooms that you would see on a public tour. And then I'll stop again. And finally, I'll talk about the two art corridors on the ground floor of the building that have been added later. It's important to think about the fact that George Washington came personally to choose the site for the building. This is a mural that is in the Capitol in the Cox Quarters that I'll talk about. But you can see Washington there on the white horse, of course. We know he actually did ride a white horse often. Peter L'Enfant, historically known as Pierre L'Enfant, but he called himself Peter, is there in the red outfit. And then Billy Lee on the right there was George Washington's enslaved manservant who came with him to almost everything he did. And so we think it's quite probable that if Washington went to find the Capitol with L'Enfant to find the location, that Billy Lee would have gone with him. Beneath Washington's horse there, you can see the Potomac River in the distance. And so you have a sense of being up on Capitol Hill and talking about what they could construct here. L'Enfant had chosen this site because you could see 2 miles to the west from here. This is a topographic map that was done more recently, trying to show what this territory would have looked like when Washington and L'Enfant came through here. You can see a couple of roads go through the site, but this is what they would have seen, the topography that they were dealing with. L'Enfant said that called the hill a pedestal waiting for a monument. And he showed it to George Washington. But the interesting thing is that he thought our national symbol should go on that hill, but we were a brand new country. We didn't really have any national symbols. What we did have was a document, and this is the Constitution. You can see it's 3.5 pages. The last half of the third page there is, the fourth page, I mean, is signatures. So it's only about 3.5 pages of text. Article 1 is the legislative branch. This is the most important part of the Constitution. It is half of the document. You can see the blue arrows are Article 1. What we had done was, when we took the sovereignty away from the King of England, we gave that sovereignty not to another individual, but to the Congress. And this is unusual. We are one of the only sovereign legislatures in the world. And this is reflected in what we did at this point. The executive, you can see with the green arrows here, is Article 2, and it only covers 1 page. So the importance of the Congress is emphasized in the document itself. So they decided to put the Congress up on that hill that they wanted to be the prominent center of town. The same day, they chose a spot for the White House, which is at the white arrow there on the left. And they put the White House down on the riverbank, just high enough that the basement doesn't flood. So they laid out the city to tell us what's important in our government. They put the Capitol up high on a hill. Now, if they're going to put a legislature here, they need a building for them to meet in, and in order to have a building, you have to have an architect. But there were no trained architects practicing in the United States. So we did what we do in our society when we don't know what we're doing, and we had a contest. We democratized architecture. No credentials were required to get into the contest. All you had to do was make nice drawings. The guy that won was William Thornton, a non-practicing medical doctor from Tortola in the British Virgin Islands. But he was a Quaker, and so he had ties in Philadelphia, and that's how he learned about the contest. What he did was take the Pantheon in Rome, that's the photograph on the left there, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, because it was a perfect circle, and that was done to show equality. And we wanted to show equality of people and of states in the Capitol. And so Dr. Thornton took put the Pantheon in the middle. He put it up on an arcade there. The photographs are the photograph on the left is a little distorted because it was taken from ground level, and so you can't really see the dome, but behind that front of the Pantheon there is a dome that looks pretty much like the one in the drawing on the right. This is the full drawing. What Thornton did was to put 2 wings on that Pantheon. And interestingly enough, this also reflects the Constitution, because in the convention, when they were writing the Constitution, they were all there representing states, and they even voted as states. And they were going to build a United States of America. But some of them felt that the people should have a direct say in the Congress, and neither side could get a majority. So finally somebody said, well, let's just do both. And so we got a House and a Senate, the House, of course, representing the voters, and the Senate representing the states. And they're right there in the architecture of the building, just like the Constitution is in the layout of the city. The House of Representatives was 3 times the size of the Senate at the beginning, but they're equal in power. And so they get equal space in the building. But this was the biggest building in North America and the first major stone building in the United States. So we didn't really know how to build it. And they were quite concerned about the making a room as large as the House chamber, or as large as the rotunda in the center. And so they first built only the Senate wing because it had a smaller chamber. And this is what it looked like when the Congress moved in 1800. But the roof leaked and the floors creaked, and they came to understand why you need an experienced architect. And luckily, at that point, Benjamin Latrobe moved to the United States. He was a trained architect, so we hired him to decide what to do with this failed building. Among the things he pointed out was that the Senate chamber had been put on the ground floor, even though if you look at the building, it looks like the major room is going to be on the second floor. But we wanted easy access for people. The architect pointed out that that causes air circulation problems, and so the chamber really needed to be moved to the second floor. But they hired him to do the house wing first, since he knew how to build the arch that we needed. And then we went back and rebuilt the Senate chamber and moved the Senate up to the second floor. By this point, it's 1809, and we still didn't have enough money. We were borrowing money to build the building, so they stopped construction, and this is what it looked like. They built a wooden walkway in between the two, and it was this way for 5 years until the British burned it. They burned the two wings there, but there wasn't anything in the middle except that wooden walkway. But that's what we had to deal with, and we had to pretty much rebuild the chambers. We had to decide whether we're going to try to move elsewhere, and finally concluded that it would cost too much money and take time to move, so we stayed here and finished the building. We finished the building by 1824. This photograph is the earliest known photograph of the Capitol, and we know it was sometime after 1824 that he took this, made this photograph. But we had planned the Capitol when we had 15 states and thought we might have 25. By the time we finished the building, the country was 3 times the size it was when we started, and it was too small already. So in 1850, when California became a state, the members got no staff and no office, but Texas had taken up the last 2 spots in the chambers, and so there was not really room for the members from California, and they knew they were going to have a lot of territory, a lot of new states between Missouri and California there, all that area that is yellow in the photograph, in the map. And so they knew they needed to enlarge the building. So this is what they did. They decided to put a wing on each end with a new chamber, and they literally doubled the size of the building with that construction. In the center is that same dome that was on the previous building, but during the construction process, they had a fire, and they almost lost the building, lost the dome in it because the wood had dried out. So the Congress told the architect who was working on the 2 wings to rebuild the dome. But the architect said that you don't put the same size dome on a building that's twice as big, and so we need to enlarge the dome. And he proposed the magnificent dome that we have today. This is a photograph taken around the time of President Lincoln's first inauguration of the dome under construction. So we finished that by 1867, and that's the date we give for completion of the original building and the additions, basically of what you see today. But underneath it, we have put, underneath the front plaza here, we have put a visitor center. And that was finished in 2008. You can see the crowds lined up on either side going into those 2 large entrances, which are below grade. You can't see them from the Capitol itself, but that's how you come in as a visitor. So with that in mind, I will stop for a moment and see if we have any questions.
Any questions out there? I see one comment here that it was the most important building in the world. I presume that might have meant the Pantheon at the time.
No, I'm meaning the Capitol.
Oh,
I think the Capitol is the most important building in the world.
oh, now, yes. Oh,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
And what was the cost of the building?
I'm sorry?
What was the overall cost of this building? Is there any way to tally up?
It has been continuously under construction for well over 200 years. You can't even translate dollars from one point to another, and so nobody's ever really tried to estimate how much it cost.
Let me ask you this. You may want to touch on this later, but uh, tell us who built the building. I think we all have come to know in the last couple of decades that was a lot of slave labor involved in the building.
There was no free labor market in this area, and so much of the construction was done by hiring the enslaved people in the area. Some of them were highly skilled. We do know that they immediately advertised for stone carvers in Italy, and they advertised there were already problems going on in Ireland, and so they brought over a lot of construction workers from Ireland as well. Uh, but the records are not very good, and of course the British burned a lot of the records in 1814. So we can't say exactly, but we do know that slave labor was involved in the Capitol right up to the placing of the Statue of Freedom on top of the dome.
Mhm. Just curious, do we know whether did George Washington rent out his slaves for the building? Any idea?
I'm sorry, I'm still having trouble hearing you.
I'm sorry, I'm not speaking loudly enough. Do we know whether George Washington rented his slaves uh, to build the building?
Whether he rented?
Whether he uh, uh, offered his slaves to to build the building?
No, George Washington immediately contacted the major proprietors in the area, particularly Daniel Carroll, who owned the place where the Capitol is now, uh, and he got them to quietly buy up all the small landholders without telling them why, so that he wouldn't have to deal with so many landowners. But he knew he didn't own this much land, and he wanted the entire area of the L'Enfant plan.
All right. Let me I think we don't have any more questions here. Let me just take a quick look. I got diverted a little bit here.
I mentioned the Statue of Freedom, so here is a photograph of it, um, which is on top of the dome. And we know that this statue, the supervisor of the foundry that was making the statue, was an enslaved African American who received his freedom while they were working on the statue, and so he got to supervise the installation of the statue as a free man, and he was paid full wages for his role.
All right, let me just see. I've got, did the work on the new dome stop during the Civil War?
Ah, that's an interesting story. The Congress immediately stopped all construction on the Capitol. They canceled all the contracts. But the contractor who was building the top part of the dome already had all of his materials, and they were stacked on the Capitol grounds, and they had taken down the fences, which meant that the livestock that wandered through the city were wandering across the Capitol grounds, and he was concerned about the iron that his materials were going to deteriorate since they didn't know how long the war was going to be. And so the contractor himself actually paid for the continued construction. Uh, Finally, the Congress, after a few months, decided that they probably had enough money for the war and could continue. And so the dome continued under construction throughout the war, but the wings did not.
And another question, what happened to the overflow representatives once the building had filled up before the new construction began?
I don't know specifically, but I'm quite sure that they received some space in the chambers, but it would have been very, very crowded, and it would have been less prestigious than the seats that they eventually got.
All right. I think we can continue.
Okay. So if you take a tour of the Capitol now, and the Capitol is open every day except Sunday, and a couple of holidays, Christmas and New Year's, but most of the time you can get a tour of the Capitol almost any day except Sundays. And this is the visitor center. This is the part that is underneath the plaza that I showed you, the entrance here. And it's designed to take 250 people every 10 minutes and show them a movie, and then get them a tour up to an hour of the building in groups with headphones and a red-coated guide. You can see one of the red-coated guides in the center of the photograph there. Excuse me. The 250 people every 10 minutes is 15,000 people a day. That's the capacity. We have not reached that in several years since the beginning of COVID. But before that, we would often reach capacity in spring break, and they would all be eighth graders. So if you can imagine a couple of thousand eighth graders in this room, that's an entirely different experience of the Capitol than you get on a normal day. The first room that you get to see on the tour is the crypt. This is the room right underneath the center, and it was designed to be the tomb of George Washington. You can see the three chandeliers lined up there across in the center, and underneath the second chandelier, the one you can see fairly well there, is where the tomb is for George Washington. But they didn't finish this part of the building for 25 years after Washington died, and the family would not let them have the body. And so George Washington is still buried at Mount Vernon along with Martha. And we have an empty tomb here at the Capitol, still waiting for someone else to be worthy to be buried there. There are also 13 statues in this part of the building. Every state gets to put 2 statues in the Capitol, and they thought that the 13 original colonies should have the first locations. And so there are 13 statues for the 13 original colonies there, one of the 2 for those colonies that are in this crypt. Now, next to that is, in the location of the first Senate chamber, is the old Supreme Court chamber. So this is the location where I showed you an arrow pointing to the ground floor. And when they moved the Senate to the second floor, they had a chamber, they had a room here to do something, and the Supreme Court didn't have any place to meet. So they created a chamber for the Supreme Court in 1809, and they met here until 1859. 1859 is when the Senate moved from the old chamber upstairs into the current chamber. And so the Supreme Court took over the old Senate chamber in 1860 and stayed there till 1935, when they finally got their own building. This room in that period functioned as the law library. So from 1859 to 1935, the law library of the Supreme Court was in this room. But when the court moved across the street, they also moved the library. This room was used for various functions from 1935 until 1976. And for the bicentennial of the country, the Congress decided to restore the room as it was in 1859 when the court moved out. And so this is what you would see on a tour here. There were 7 justices when they moved into the room in 1809 and 9 justices when they moved out. That number is not in the Constitution. The Congress controls the number of justices, and they have not changed it since 1859, although at one point they did have 10, but it went back to 9. So there are 9 chairs up in front. 3 original chairs are donated by the justices' families after they died. 6 other chairs are historic and were used in the Capitol, but not by justices. Now, the importance of this courtroom is two particular cases. One is the Olmsted case, and that is the shipload of enslaved Africans that overthrew the crew but didn't know how to steer back to Africa and ended up in the United States. That case was made into a famous movie called Amistad by Steven Spielberg, and he got Best Picture Award for it. The second case is Dred Scott, and that's the Great Slavery case. Dred Scott was an enslaved man who had been taken into free territory, which traditionally had been an indication that you were free. But the man that he had worked with died, and his wife was from Missouri, where slavery was legal, and so she sued to get her property. And they took the case all the way to the Supreme Court. The Chief Justice decided that he would solve the slavery issue. It was tying up our government over everything, and so he wrote that he could not see that any black man had any rights that any white man has to respect. What he did was to try to write racism into our law. That seems breathtaking to us now. But he honestly thought he was solving the issue. And instead, what he did was to start a war. In many ways, we can say that the Civil War started with the Dred Scott decision, where the Supreme Court came down in favor of slavery and eliminated any rights for people of other races. So the point of that is that, in fact, our whole history gets acted out in this building. And this is why I call it the most important building in the world, because what happens here writes our history. Now, above that, on the second floor, on a tour, you would go up to the second floor at this point, and you would see the rotunda. On the left is Thomas Walter's drawing of the rotunda as he planned it. You can see it has an iron frame inside, and then supporting what looks like the structure on the outside, which is really just plates of cast iron. On the right is looking up straight from the bottom of the dome to see the magnificent view. Here's what it's like to stand in the rotunda and see it as experienced from a human eye level. In the rotunda, there are 8 paintings, 12 statues, 4 bas-relief scenes, 4 profile busts, the frieze of American history, the coffers and the windows that are magnificently decorated, and the apotheosis fresco, and that's what we're going to talk about here. The 8 paintings are heroic size. They are all by John Trumbull. I'm sorry, the first 4 are by John Trumbull, and the other 4 have other artists. But I'm just going to go through them and show you the paintings and talk a little bit about each one. This is the first one, the most famous painting in the Capitol, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson is there in the red vest, John Adams in the brown suit, Benjamin Franklin on the other side. Those are the 5 authors of on the committee that drafted the document. And the man sitting in the chair with his back to us on the right is John Hancock, who's about to put the most famous signature in history on that document. The second painting is the Battle of Saratoga. This is the surrender of General Burgoyne after the Battle of Saratoga. It is the most important battle in the Revolution because it was the only time we captured an entire British army and made them surrender. They had gotten too far away from the coast, and we were able to cut off their food supply. So ever after that, the British army wouldn't leave the coast, and our army was safe if they went a few days' march inland. That was enough to make the French think we might win. So in the third painting, you have the French army on the left, the American army on the right, and the British having to surrender down the middle. This is General Cornwallis's surrender after the Battle of Yorktown. We usually think of the Revolution as ending at that point, but it took 2 more years to get the British to sign a treaty and finally withdraw their army. And this is George Washington's moment. He's been away from home for 8 years with the army, and he chose to meet with the Congress and resign. That's the Congress on the left, and this is the Maryland State Senate. This room still exists in Annapolis, and that's where the Congress was meeting at the time. George Washington is submitting his resignation there. The backstory is that those generals that are behind him had a meeting, called a meeting in Newburgh, New York, several months before this, in which they decided to ask George Washington to keep the piece of paper, ask him not to resign his commission, basically because they hadn't been paid yet. But the reason they had not been paid was that the Congress did not have the taxing power to raise the money to pay them. Everyone knew that this government could not function as it was. The British in particular knew it, and they were simply waiting for our country to fall apart. So George Washington found out about the meeting and showed up uninvited, and he explained to them why he would not do what they wanted to do. He said, "We promised that we would give government by the consent of the governed, and I will not be part of setting up a government based on military power." This is crucial in our history. Indeed, I would submit that this is the one major accomplishment of the United States government, is to set the example for the whole world. Before this moment, governments were normally set up by the group that had the biggest army in the capital. George Washington changed that. And because of Washington's action at this time, and because it was the right man at the right time, and the world was ready for this message, election is now considered the sole legitimate source of power in human government. It's so considered to the point that in Russia and China and Venezuela and Cambodia and anywhere else, they don't want to trust the election. They fake one. And nobody ever faked an election before this moment that I can find in history. So George Washington actually changed the course of history, being the right man at the right time, to set the example for the whole world. And we celebrate that in the Capitol with this most sacred of paintings. The other four paintings are four different artists, and they got to choose their own topics. This is DeSoto at the Mississippi River. This is Columbus landing in the West Indies, one of the most famous paintings of Columbus. These are the Pilgrims leaving Europe to come to America, also a very famous painting. And finally, the baptism of Pocahontas. Now, this one takes a little explanation. You have to think of this wedding between Pocahontas in the center there, being baptized before the wedding. And she's about to marry John Rolfe, the guy in red there. And this is the first semi-official wedding between the old world and the new. And so that is why it's honored here in the Capitol. Now, the statues are quite a number of them. I'm not going to name them all off, but there are three representative ones. First, Abraham Lincoln on the left there. That is Lincoln as the winner of the Civil War. The Congress commissioned this statue of him. The second statue in the middle is George Washington, and this is the Virginia State statue of George Washington, which is kept in the rotunda because he was a president and, of course, our great leader. On the right is Andrew Jackson, honored by Tennessee. He certainly is a towering figure in American history among presidents, and so deserves to be in the rotunda. In fact, what we do is place the presidents. If a state chooses a president, we place them in the rotunda. And so recently, the state of Missouri decided to take out one of their statues, Thomas Hart Benton, and put in Harry Truman. Truman was a president, so Truman bumped Alexander Hamilton, and poor Hamilton had to go into the corridor downstairs. We also have the three leaders of women's suffrage here in the suffragist memorial. Elizabeth Cady Stanton on the left, Susan B. Anthony in the middle, and Lucretia Mott. These are the women who organized the conference in 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York, which is considered the beginning of the women's rights movement. Now we get to the frieze around the middle. I show you on the left, lower left again is looking up at the frieze, and it is the second row of figures that you can see starting from either side. There are square coffers below, and then the figures, and they are painted in what's called trompe l'oeil, or trick the eye, to look three-dimensional, even though they're only two, by painting in the shadows. So what you see on the lower right is Thomas Jefferson reading the Declaration of Independence to the public in Philadelphia on July 4th, 1776. And then you see the whole thing strung out as though it were in a straight line at the top. Now, this is the center of the rotunda, and the most famous painting in the Capitol is George Washington going to heaven. This is a painting that imitates the artwork in cathedrals in Europe, but it puts George Washington in the place of God or Jesus or whoever would be painted into a cathedral. And this is because this is Italian art. This is the artist Constantino Brumidi, who'd been a prominent artist in Rome, but was in the wrong place at the wrong time in the Revolution of 1848, and was kicked out of Rome by the Pope whose portrait he had painted. Brumidi knew that the wings and the dome were being added to the building, so he wrote ahead and asked if he could come and paint here. He was much better than any American artist, so we hired him all the rest of his life to paint in the Capitol building, and we'll see some more of his works. But this is his most famous painting at the top of the Capitol, showing George Washington going to heaven. Washington is wearing a lap robe there. We think Brumidi did that because otherwise we'd be looking up George Washington's crotch. But below him is armed freedom with a sword there. Now, we use the rotunda for ceremonies, and the most famous ceremony is lying in state. And it happened, I was going through the Capitol the evening before Billy Graham lay in state, and so I took this picture to show what it's like. That's the catafalque out in the middle there. That's the stand on which the casket lays, and it is the stand that was built for Abraham Lincoln's funeral. To lie in state. So that's a major use of the rotunda, but we use it for lots of other things. For instance, since it was too cold for President Trump's inauguration this time, they had his inauguration in the rotunda here. Now, on the other side is the old Senate chamber. This is the room that's right above the courtroom where we started. And this is restored as it was in 1859 when the Senate moved out into the current chamber. Visitors on the tour most days, if it's not too crowded, they get to walk right up the center aisle here, but stop short of the president's, the vice president's chair there. You can't get up close to that, but you can walk up and get a sense of being in the room. And here you would see the desks. There were 32 states at that point, so there are 64 desks for the 64 senators, and this is where, as it would have been when they were meeting there. Among the senators that served in here, Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, John C. Calhoun. Those are the leaders of what we call the golden age of the Senate, when the great debates, particularly about slavery and about the nature of the national government, were carried out. Andrew Jackson was a senator in here. Thomas Hart Benton, Jefferson Davis, Stephen Douglas, Sam Houston, and Andrew Johnson were all senators in here. And you see the white arrow on the right. It is pointing to the second desk on the back row, and that was the desk of Senator Charles Sumner, who gave his famous speech, The Crime Against Kansas, in this chamber. And a couple of days later, a congressman named Preston Brooks was so angry at the speech that he came in and beat Sumner unconscious with a cane. This is 1856. I talked about the fact that the Civil War started with the Dred Scott decision in the old Supreme Court chamber, but the truth is that the war became irrepressible. That is, it was not going to be solved by anything but violence with this act in the Senate chamber, in which a congressman beat up a senator for opposing slavery. Our whole history gets acted out in the building, and we are a representative democracy. So we represent the ugly and the hateful in ourselves as surely as we do the beautiful and the admirable. Now, on the other side of the building, on the other side of the rotunda, I should say, is the old House chamber, and this is what it looks like today. This is National Statuary Hall, and it was to fill this room after the House moved in the current chamber. that they decided to let each state have 2 statues. And they, of course, accepted the statues in the order that they were received, and they put them in here. But by the time they started the 3rd row of statues, the states that put theirs in first didn't like being stuck in the back, and so they protested about it. And they were concerned about whether the floor would actually hold 96 statues. So they decided to figure out how many they could push up against the wall, kind of crowd them in, but make them look like they are all equal. So there are 38 statues in here, and the rest of them are scattered throughout the building. This is a historic painting by Samuel Morse from 1821, in which he shows the House meeting in that chamber. And you can see that the Sergeant at Arms is lighting the chandelier. They would raise it back up, but it was getting too dark in the chamber. But this is what it looked like when they met in here. Eventually, there were 262 desks crammed into that room, and so that's when they realized they had to build a bigger chamber. This is another drawing. This is from the Cox corridors, and this shows John Quincy Adams giving a speech there in the center. This is him located in that chamber. He's probably the person most prominently associated with it, in particular because he sat in that seat for 17 years until he had a stroke sitting there and was carried off into the Speaker's office where he died. So he's the person most associated with the room. This is the current House chamber. It is down the hall further at the end of the building. And you can see that there are lots and lots of seats, and then the gallery above where the public can watch. And this is where they meet now. There are 435 members, 6 delegates from territories and the Commonwealths and the District of Columbia, of course. All of them are elected every 2 years. All the meetings in the House and the Senate are covered by C-SPAN. But one thing that's not commonly known is that C-SPAN does not control the cameras. The cameras are actually controlled by the House for the House and by the Senate for the Senate, and they are required to stay trained on the official business, whoever is speaking, and they're not allowed to show other people in the room or anything else except official business. So C-SPAN shows what the House of Representatives gives them. This is the Speaker's dais up in front. The Speaker gets the chair at the top. That podium is actually on a lower level. It's down a little bit, and there are clerks that have the chairs on either side. But this is what it looks like in the center. This is a close-up of the chairs that the members get. Again, they get no assigned seats. They can sit anywhere they want, but generally the Democrats will sit on the Speaker's right and the Republicans on the left. But certain more senior members have particular chairs that they like, and they will ask a freshman to move out of that seat if they take it by mistake. But this is what it looks like. This is the viewpoint from the committee chair table. You can see on the left lower corner is the edge of the Democratic leadership table, and the table that's in the center here with the podium belongs to the committee chair for whatever committee is reporting the bill that they are talking about. On the right upper corner, you can see the end of the Republican leadership table on the other side. There are 2 lecterns down in the center so that the members speak. Basically, there are 2 lecterns so that one can be spreading his papers to start immediately when the other one finishes, and the other one finishing can gather up his papers while the other member is speaking. But one has to have permission to speak. The debate is outlined by the Rules Committee and the leaders of each party. The 2 sides are always given equal time, but the time is divided up by the leadership of the party or of the committee. At the end of the legislative day, they have what they call special orders, and any member of Congress can reserve up to an hour of time with C-SPAN running to talk about anything they want to. So if they feel that they've been left out of the debate, didn't get enough time or whatever, then they can reserve time in the evenings. It is estimated that at least 100,000 people are watching, and so it becomes quite a way to build a political base by giving these speeches late at night. This is the way they vote. On the back of every other aisle seat is this machine, and they stick their card in the machine, and then they push a button. The blue button is for yes. I'm sorry, the green button is for yes. The red button is for no. The yellow button is to vote present, and that is to show that you were part of the discussion, but you're not going to vote either way. And then the blue button is actually a light indicating that the machine is working properly. This is the House chamber with the lights showing at the top of the photograph. You can see the list of names. That's a list of every member of Congress, and they get a green light if they vote yes, a red light if they vote no. And so that's how they indicate their vote. But it is the tally of the machine and not the display that determines the vote itself. So the tally clerk declares the vote at the end. This is the State of the Union address that takes place in the House chamber. You can see they pack lots and lots of people in there. And the president speaks, but he has to speak from the second level. He speaks from that clerk's podium because he's a guest in the chamber. The president must be invited to speak. They bring in another chair for the vice president there at the top, so the speaker and the vice president are there. And for that short period of time in the Capitol building, the vice president, as president of the Senate, outranks the president, who is from the executive branch and not the legislative branch. This is an interesting picture of some members of Congress occupying the House floor because they didn't feel like they got proper attention, in this case, to gun control legislation in the House. That, of course, is the late Congressman John Lewis in the center. And so this is the Senate. This is the Senate chamber. On the other side, the chamber is much smaller, and there are 100 desks. Each senator gets their own desk. 2 senators from each state. They're elected as 6-year terms, and 1/3 of them are elected every 2 years. Viewed from the gallery here, you can see that the public can be sitting up in the gallery and watching them as they work. The leadership sits at the two desks in the center there that had podiums on them on either side of the main aisle, and then on the outside of them are the 2 whips. And other than that, the senators decide where they sit by seniority. The most senior senator gets any seat that he wants, or she, and then in order they choose where they want to sit. 44 of these desks were moved from the other chamber and were historic. The senators, after they get to keep the desk for 2 years, then they get to carve their name in it so that they know that all of the famous senators who had that desk before they did. This is what the desks themselves look like. They lift the top lid there and carve on the underside of that. Senators speak from their own desks, but they vote in the well in the center of the chamber. But a senator can speak as long as he or she wants. It takes 60 votes to stop a debate, except for judicial appointments and certain other votes, such as the reconciliation bill that is under consideration in the Congress at the moment. Impeachments also take place in the Senate chamber. The House impeaches, but the Senate would convict and remove. This is the first impeachment of President Trump, and you can see the Chief Justice presiding over this. Here's another photograph of the Senate moving from impeachment to regular business, and so the impeachment officers have to leave the chamber. There you can see on just to the left of center is the former Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and on the other side, sitting down, is the Democratic leader, Senator Schumer. Here's a famous moment in the chamber, the second time that Winston Churchill addressed the Congress. He had to do so in the Senate chamber because the House chamber was under renovation at the time. And so they had to crowd in. But this is a historic moment in the history of the Senate. The press conferences that the Senate leadership take place in the hall outside the Senate chamber. That arched doorway is the door of the Senate. And this is Trent Lott when he was a majority leader giving a press conference. You can see what happens to the photographers. They have to stay behind that velvet rope and get their shots from there. Here is Senator Schumer giving his press conference along with Senator Baldwin from Wisconsin. So with that, I will stop for questions again and then quickly go through the two sets of corridors that are on the ground floor.
We have one question from back when we were in the rotunda about whether there are any requirements on the size of the statues there. And I guess that could go for the statuary hall as well.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to repeat louder. I can't hear you.
All right, try that again. I'm wondering about requirements for the size of statues, both in the rotunda and the statuary hall. Who decides that?
There weren't any requirements until recently, and the statues began to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and so finally they have sort of voluntary requirements. But as soon as they make a rule around the Capitol, somebody changes it.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you this question now because we've only got a few minutes left, 10 minutes or so. But given the rise in executive power recently and the power of the president, how do you feel about that, reflect on that when you think about the history of the Capitol building and its symbolic position as the most powerful branch?
Well, this has been a continuing story from the beginning. The reason why the District of Columbia doesn't have representation in Congress is because the incoming what called themselves Republicans at that time, the Jeffersonians, knew that the district would vote for the Federalists, and so they didn't give them the vote. So it goes back to the beginning. We talk about gerrymandering all the time, but nobody pays any attention to the fact that gerrymandering occurred in the very first reapportionment. Every reapportionment that we've ever had was gerrymandered. And trying to bring these things under control is very difficult. We've been seeking a balance between the executive and legislative powers throughout, and so we have to make adjustments all the time.
All right, please continue.
Okay, so we have the Cox corridors on the House side and the Brumidi corridors on the right. Brumidi was painting just as the Senate was moving into the wings, and whereas Cox corridors are a bicentennial project of the U.S. Capitol Historical Society, my organization, so they were put in the 1970s and 80s. Here's the floor plan of the ground floor. The Cox corridors are the ones in blue on the left, and the Brumidi corridors, the ones in yellow on the right. I don't know how that got in there. Let me go back and see. No, I can't do anything about it. So anyway, this is I made some adjustments, and I guess it got put in the wrong place. Anyway, this is what the Brumidi corridors look like. You can see that it's very Italian looking. Brumidi was an Italian refugee. He'd painted in the Vatican and other churches and elaborate palaces and so forth. And so that's what he did with the corridors on the Senate side. This is the same corridor, but with lighting at night. So you can see the colors change depending upon whether they're exterior or interior lighting. Here's some more. That staircase on the left goes right up to the Senate chamber, and Bermidi designed the banister but did not execute it himself. But you can see this corridor down the center here it was going to be one of the busiest corridors, and people wouldn't have time to stop and look at the paintings. And so this is one where he was not very elaborate with the design. These are some close-ups of some of his designs, the very Italian-looking fruit still life on the left. On the right is some wildlife taken from the naturalists who were going through the West and documenting it. Now, in the middle is the moon landing, and I love telling people that some people think that Bermidi was clairvoyant in his ability to paint the moon landing in the 1850s. But in fact, he left spots, places where we could add. And so one of the things that we thought was worth commemorating in the Capitol building is the moon landing. So that is actually a canvas oil painting and not a fresco. This shows you one of the corridors that they have transformed. On the left is the old design. What had happened was Bermidi painted what's on the right here, but then other artists came along and didn't respect what he was trying to do. They weren't nearly as good as he was, and so they paint this muddy green over the beautiful, vibrant color on the right. And so the Congress spent 30 years peeling off all of that overpaint and restoring the Bermidi corridors to the magnificent design that they were when Bermidi did them. On the other side of the Capitol are the Cox corridors. As I said, these are the gift of the U.S. Capitol Historical Society, and the house corridors tend to be a lot more crowded, so we had them put the paintings on the ceiling. And it happened between 1973 and 1993. The reason it took so long was the artists kept dying or being seriously ill, and so we finally had to bring another artist to finish up the third corridor. On the left, you see a trompe l'oeil bust of Clara Barton. This is from the ceiling there, and there are lots of these in there. She's just a representative. And on the right is one of the first paintings of a Native American in the corridor, showing their role in our history. That painting of the British burning the Capitol from the Bermidi corridors, or the Cox corridors, painted by Alan Cox. And we also added people who contributed to the Capitol as we see it. Frederick Law Olmsted, the great landscape architect, planned the Capitol grounds, and they try to follow his plan today, and so he gets a bust in the Cox corridors. The story of representative government starts with the Mayflower Compact in 1620. And that's shown on the left. On the right is an African American voting for the first time right after the Civil War. There are lots of maps showing westward expansion in particular. That's on the left. And on the right is Federal Hall, where the Congress met. We've honored every place where the Congress ever met with paintings in this corridor. We even picked out some sayings throughout American history to be enshrined in the Capitol. On the left is a magnificent piece of trompe l'oeil. That is a flat painting, but you would never know it even standing right below it. It's so beautifully done. And on the right, you can see the Viking ship arriving. This is the only recognition of America before Columbus. So here's our organization. We would love to have you as members of the Capitol Historical Society. Once in a while, I even get people to volunteer to give tours of the building. And so we use volunteers for those purposes too. And I hope you have enjoyed the presentation. If you have any questions, we have a couple of minutes left.
We have one question. Is there an online tour of the Capitol?
There are some things that you can see on the Capitol Visitor Center website. some of it is detailed, some of it's not. And I actually have not seen the latest version of it, but nothing systematic that I know of.
And someone wants you to repeat again who designed and built the dome.
Yeah, you're going to have to repeat this.
Who designed, someone wants you to repeat who designed and built the dome of the Capitol.
Ah, okay. The dome that we have now was designed by Thomas Walter, and there were two contractors involved. One, a Baltimore contractor called Poole and Hunt, and they built about the first third of it up to the first row of windows, and then the rest of it was done by Kirkland Janney and Company of Brooklyn, New York. And it's Kirkland who made the decision to continue constructing the dome, and so he's actually the one that paid for the dome for several months during this, right at the beginning of the Civil War.
You've had a long history of giving tours of the Capitol. And I wonder, in that time, is there any specific interaction that you recall that has made an impression on you with one of the people you're giving the tour to?
Probably the most consequential was when I was just learning to give tours, and I'd been kind of turned loose to do what I wanted, and my tours kept getting longer and longer and so forth, and I was having to learn to cut back and not exceed people's attention span. And at the end of one of my tours, a woman turned to me and she said, "You know, I feel better about my country for having come on this tour." And so that has been the object of the choices that I make and what I talk about in the time that people are willing to listen, that in particular.
Well, thank you so much, Steve Livengood, for a fascinating presentation. I'm sure I speak for all of us saying it was incredibly informative and very meaningful. And thanks to all of you for joining Chevy Chase at Home today for our speaker series and being such a good audience. I invite you to explore our other programming listed on our website. You'll find the web address in the chat stream. Thanks
Thank
again,
you.
Steve, and to the audience. We'll see you around the neighborhood or at the next event.